Crime Curious is a true crime podcast that takes an in-depth look into real cases through the lens of a trained investigator and former prosecutor turned judge.
If you are sensitive to expletives, anatomical descriptions, and accurate descriptions of crime scenes, this podcast may not be suitable for you.
Welcome to Crime Curious. I'm Charnell.
I'm Megan.
Megan, let's shake all of our good luck, Gree.
Absolutely.
All right. The case that I have for us today is going to be handled with special care. Not that we don't handle our other cases with special care, but we're covering this at the request of the victim's sister, Jana. Okay. She reached out to us directly asking for us to get awareness out there for her sister's death. Her sister's name is Crystal. And this is a case where no one has been charged. We do have a petition that people could sign, like a call to action case.
Is it local?
It is not.
Thank you.
It is not.
No offense. I just need to know for commentary purposes.
Yeah. It is not, but I'll start kind of at the beginning here, and then we'll
she tells you this, general audience, because sometimes we start in the middle or at the end and work our way back, depending on what best suits the victim perspective.
Yes. This case starts on February 9th, 2023, when 43-year-old Crystal McCrory Jones, mother of two, was found dead in her home from a gunshot wound to the head in the small town of Oak Grove, Louisiana. Her husband was a one-time former employee of the West Carroll Parish Sheriff's Department, the same department that ends up conducting the lackluster investigation, rife with mistakes and issues, into the death of Crystal McCrory Jones. On this podcast, we are sensitive to any disparaging remarks about law enforcement, especially small-town law enforcement, because we understand the complexity of investigations. We live with law enforcement officers as spouses and close friends. However, when seemingly small errors are made in an investigation, and when there are a lot of them, it rightfully so raises suspicion, and it creates an entire relationship of mistrust between the victim's family and the department. Megan, this is not a case where you will likely praise the small-town police work, because the truth is the truth, and mistakes were made here. Okay.
And I don't think that there's anything wrong with especially experts pointing these things out, because when you make a mistake as a small town PD, you need to learn from your mistakes so you don't make them again.
And acknowledge them. All right.
Typically.
But this lends into the full support into why the family is suspicious and why they are simply calling for a proper investigation into Crystal's death. That is what the purpose is here.
It's not asking a lot.
It's not. So let me kind of really start from what we know and go through here. But Crystal McCrory Jones had not been feeling well on October 9th, 2023. So she made herself a doctor's appointment that morning, and they could get her in at 2:30. Okay. Her husband, Tony, knew of this appointment. What we know is that Crystal had her normal cup of coffee that morning. She got herself bathed, dressed, and her makeup on. However, she did not show up for the 2:30 doctor's appointment. Instead, at 5:05 p.m., her body is found in her bed with a pillow over her face and a gunshot wound to her head. The gun lay perfectly in Crystal's hand, finger still on the trigger. Tony Jones was the last person to speak to her husband, at 11:06 a.m. over the phone for several minutes. Then, according to the coroner's report, she was deceased by approximately 11 a.m.
When did he talk to her last?
10:06 a.m.
Okay.
She was found by her neighbor, Chuck Harris, who coincidentally worked for the West Carroll Parish Sheriff's Department as a deputy.
Okay.
Chuck had received a phone call from Tony Jones saying that he had been trying to get into contact with Crystal all day with no response, and that he'd even called the clinic that she was supposed to have a doctor's appointment at and learned that she never showed up. So he asked Chuck,
the neighbor, who happens to be law enforcement,
to go over for a welfare check. Okay.
And he's working far away at this point?
Well, we'll get to where he is.
Yeah. Well, you know where my mind goes.
Yes. Tony was on the phone with Chuck when he went to the house and saw Crystal's car in the driveway. Tony gave him permission to enter the house and told him immediately that the bedroom was in the back and that her name was Crystal. What's suspicious to the family is, why did Tony immediately tell Chuck to check the bedroom?
Yep.
Why is he just leading her there, right?
Well, I think that those are hard situations, because it could have just been as simple as he thought she had fallen asleep because she didn't feel good, that she had a doctor's appointment that day. Or he knew exactly where the body was, and he accidentally led him straight to it.
Sure. And as I'm telling you this information, I want you to look at it from the perspective of, if this was your sister, if this was your daughter or your aunt, because she had a big loving family. She was very close with her family, and they are fighting like hell to get this case properly investigated.
Sure, I get it.
Yes.
I am, though, going to give, because that's what I do, your potential for what it clearly looks like has happened, and the alternative hypothesis in this case.
Right.
If it was appropriately investigated, because law enforcement officers are supposed to investigate hypotheses as well, not just what it appears
what it
to
might
be.
look like. Yep. But I'm just saying,
because you said she was found with a gun in her hand with her finger on the trigger.
Right.
So we all know right off the bat where a lot of people's heads are going to jump to in the immediate.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm just saying, I understand why this particular piece would sound suspicious to the family. Like, wait, he told her right immediately where the bedroom was. So Chuck called out her name and found Crystal in her bed, deceased. And so he tells Tony on the phone, that I found her and she is deceased. So obviously police are called. Investigation starts. The coroner arrives, as did Crystal's siblings, Dane and Jana. Jana reported that, of course, she was not allowed in the house and she was told to leave, but she said she was not going to go anywhere until her sister's body was brought out. All right. The coroner came out and spoke to the sheriff and said, we still have to do an autopsy, making Jana think, had there been a conversation where perhaps we weren't going to do one?
Yes, Jana, there was.
Because
most they were going to jump right to suicide.
Well, in less than 2 hours, the police already call it a suicide.
Yes.
Yeah.
Charnell, I am not shocked, because I have seen small town law enforcement, either untrained or unwilling in really bad cases, jump to that initial conclusion. It is what it appears to be, and we're not going to look into it any further.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what happens.
Okay.
There is no investigation.
That was it.
This was it. Where an investigation happens is from the family hiring a private detective.
Okay.
So any investigation information I give you henceforth, just know that comes from private investigation information that's been collected by the family, not from the police department.
Because there isn't anything.
It's
not even like they're holding information close to them so that they don't, taint an investigation.
Right.
There's just nothing.
They rule it a suicide. The police did question Tony. It lasted 7 minutes. It was recorded. And at the beginning of the recording, the sheriff literally says he is interviewing Tony Jones regarding the self-inflicted death of his wife, Crystal McCrory Jones. Right from so that's this, just so you guys know, that's not he wasn't then interrogated. He was not questioned. That was more so of just I'm going to debrief you on how your wife committed suicide. I mean, it really does say that.
I just dealt with a very similar mock crime scene that was like this at my conference on crimes against women, where it very clearly looked like a woman had committed suicide, and that's how it was ruled. And luckily, though, those law enforcement officers that I was talking to understand that law enforcement mess up, and then a coroner, amazing coroner later, was able to indicate, oh no, that is not how she died.
Yeah.
This is a homicide. And they were able to reinvestigate and open that case up. It's still being prosecuted, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Maybe I'll cover it at some point. But this situation, I'm so sorry, Jana, that you're having to deal with this, because this happens.
Mm-hmm.
This is happening all over.
Yes.
With women.
Yeah.
As victims.
Yeah. There was no suicide note, which Crystal had, and the family openly says, years ago in the past, she was treated for depression. She did have suicidal thoughts. But at this state in her life at 43, mother of 2, she was having none of those situations. She was known for leaving notes everywhere. She even had notes about her notes, Jana said.
She was also advocating for her health care because she wasn't feeling well and made a doctor's appointment.
Yeah, she physically wasn't feeling well. She wasn't feeling depressed.
Right.
This is a big family, very connected with one another. And none of those signs that she had from years prior when she was treated for depression. And this, actually, to be honest with you, the whole thing pisses me off, that just because someone years ago was treated for depression does not mean, it must have been suicide then. Absolutely not.
No, and I don't like the thought that people, investigators, professionals might think that, because it discourages people for asking for help or getting assistance if you are depressed or have some type of an anxiety disorder and need to be medicated. That does not make you suicidal, even if you had ideation or tendencies. Is it evidence that there might be something deeper, that maybe they need to do some additional investigation to see what your current mental state had been? But they didn't even care to do that.
But they didn't even do that. No, but the family is very open.
And they're like, she's been great.
Right. Like, absolutely. They're like, yes, she was treated for that before. She did have suicidal thoughts before. But none of that was relevant and currently happening in her life. She did not leave a note, which is not like her at all. So, of course, the family does not believe right from the get-go here that this is a suicide. And then they found Tony's behavior directly after Crystal's death to raise even more suspicion. Like how Tony had Crystal cremated quickly and immediately after the autopsy.
Okay, they did do an autopsy.
We get to some information in it. Yes, we do. And the autopsy ruled the death a suicide as well. This is going to raise some more suspicion, as I said. So the autopsy, immediately after it, he gets her cremated. The family was begging him not to, but it doesn't matter. He's the next of kin. So he got her cremated. When the family got a copy of the autopsy report, it was filled with errors. Her name was spelled wrong. Her date of birth and her date of death were wrong. It listed that she had epilepsy and pneumonia, neither of which she had. The time listed that her body was found was initially listed as 10:35 a.m. and was scratched out with 5:05 listed instead.
Is it possible that they did find some pneumonia in her lungs because she'd been sick and was actually going to the doctor?
Jana is very adamant that she was not sick like that at all. And she certainly never had epilepsy.
Well, right, clearly. You would have had a history of that. But are they trying to indicate that she had some type of a seizure, that there was some type of evidence of a brain activity like that? And then, of course, any type of pneumonia in the lungs. I mean, there's some potential there, but they're all concerns when you couple them with these other things.
Right. Well, and I'm sorry, her name being spelled wrong, her date of birth and her date of death wrong.
Oh, yeah, that's not a valid certificate.
This isn't someone who's paying attention to what they're doing, is it?
No.
The attention to detail is gone. And if you are if you add all of these small errors, that's what I meant in the beginning. When you take all of these small errors that add up, it creates an entire culture of distrust.
Well, was it even her?
Is this
a report on someone else?
Were you really looking at my sister's body? Right? And we'll get into more about it. The case file on this case said that the gun was a Ruger EC9. However, a check of the gun's serial number shows that it was an LC9, not a Ruger EC9. Okay? Again, these small errors that might seem like
minutia,
insignificant.
It's attention to detail.
It is.
Or lack thereof.
Exactly. And Jana said that there was one glaring mistake that made her question the entire investigation. And that is how the investigation report said law enforcement couldn't find the shell casing, but Tony found it 9 days later. In both a recorded conversation between Jana and the West Carroll Parish Sheriff, Scott Matthews, as well as Deputy Irby, their report, Matthews and Irby said that the casing is pictured in the crime scene photos. Okay, in the photos. And Jana said, I'm looking at these. There's no casing in plain sight at all. What it boils down to is the police officers are saying, yeah, it was there all along in our photos, and we didn't see it on the nightstand. When you look at the photos, what they're actually looking at is the end of a makeup brush that's sitting up on it. Like, you know how you can set a makeup brush on its actual bristles?
Yes.
And then the end of it's like shiny because it's got a metal casing.
You can get decorative ones, of course.
Yep, and it's just a tiny little makeup brush, right? They're trying to tell Jana that that's the glare, that's the reflection, that makeup brush, that's the reflection of the shell casing that was there the whole time.
Okay.
No, but they missed it. So they just missed it. They took these photos. They were there on scene and didn't see this alleged shell casing on the nightstand. But 9 days later, all of a sudden, Tony's like, oh, I found the shell casing in the bedroom. Here it is. That's a problem for the family. Photographs taken of Crystal's body at the scene and during the autopsy and funeral home were showing what appeared to be bruising around Crystal's hands and her inner thighs. The photographs indicate the likelihood of someone fighting or struggling, okay, as the bruising cannot occur post-mortem, right? Okay.
So there's evidence of either self-defense or that she was actively engaged in an attack.
Right. The bruising was not mentioned in any of the investigative reports or the autopsy.
How?
When the coroner was questioned by the family and the private investigators, they wrote it off as lividity.
That's not how lividity works.
That's exactly what the family said.
Because, again, I'm going to take you back to this example in this hanging that I had where this guy the victim allegedly had hung herself and allegedly was found on her knees, like almost in a sitting position, but on her shins and like sitting like forward and then hanging. Okay.
Okay.
Where would you think lividity would set in if that she was truly died in that position?
If she died in that position and she's on her knees.
She's on her her knees and shins in a sitting position being held up, her neck being held up by the rope and her arms down.
So lividity is truly where gravity is taking the blood.
Right.
So it's going to sit and pool, in my mind, in her legs.
Yes. Her knees,
your knees
legs,
and below and
then,
possible feet, like top
hands,
of her feet.
Right. If their
and her
arms
hands
are hanging down. Okay.
Right.
In that case, the only lividity, the bruising was found on her back.
What?
Her whole back. She was clearly laying flat when she died.
Yeah.
Okay. So you take a situation like that, perfect example, textbook of how to go over lividity and how it sets in with a professional, with a coroner.
Right.
In that case, a coroner who knew what they were doing apparently because he or she said, oh no, that is not the position that this woman died in.
Right.
So now you have this situation where you have these marks, bruising on arms and hands and things like that.
It's on her hands and her inner thighs.
Guys, that's not how lividity works.
Right.
I am not an expert scientist.
Right.
I am not a coroner, but I know how lividity works.
The other thing that was questionable to the family, too, is that she had just had her fingernails freshly manicured.
Yes.
And she was missing an entire nail.
Yeah, that just doesn't happen.
On the same hand where there's bruising to indicate that there was a struggle, there's a very disturbing amount of Benadryl. That's not the exact name of the drug, you guys.
Diphenhydramine.
I'm using that as, just so everyone can understand what type of drug that it is in her body. Enough to sedate a horse.
Dude, 1 or 2 Benadryl will knock me out for the entire night.
If she has enough in her body at the time of the autopsy to sedate a horse, how did she pull the trigger?
I don't know. I can barely say my name.
Exactly, right? There was also no gunshot residue analysis done on her body, which is standard procedure in an investigation, involving firearms. And Jana was reassured, the sister, Jana, was reassured by the sheriff that it was going to be done, and it never was.
Did anybody swab her to check for any DNA or skin cells under those perfectly manicured nails?
No. To make matters worse, Jana attempted to contact the sheriff to sound the alarm on these issues. And she was told that he has known Tony Jones for most of his life, and he is not the kind of man that would have anything to do with something like this.
You can't say that.
No. Why? Also, he worked at this sheriff's department. This sheriff's department should not have been the investigating authority.
No, absolutely not.
Just because he didn't work there anymore does not matter. It's still a conflict of interest.
I just can't believe that an official in those cases, we have to be very careful about first of all, the things that we say and how we say them. But if you don't think that a suspect in a potential crime, but of course he's not considering a crime.
He's not.
But say there's a potential crime, is not capable of doing those things, then you've just outed yourself that you are not capable of being a neutral party for the investigation. Absolutely. I catch myself doing these things. Yeah. I catch myself saying, oh, they wouldn't do that. I guess I'm not going to hear that case.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, I am not the person to hear this or to investigate this if I can't be neutral. And if you are a professional out there listening to this, and probably you aren't, because I don't know if we have a lot of professionals that listen to us, but if you are, it is okay to say, I cannot keep an open mind in this case. Please find somebody that can do this case justice. I hope it's not what it's starting to look like. Right?
Yep. That's all
There's nothing wrong. That's the most professional thing you can do.
And I'm sick of small town professionals in law enforcement. Small towns always getting spit on by other people's bad work.
I know.
Like, we have an amazing small town here, and I would be devastated to know that, something like this went on and people didn't recuse themselves when they needed to.
If it looks like a cover-up and it smells like a cover-up, you are never going to live it down as an agency ever. It doesn't matter if it really wasn't. Yes. If you don't do your jobs right, cover yourselves and protect yourselves from liability. Yeah. Then this is the perfect example of what happens. And who's going to take you seriously if someone actually needs help?
Yeah, I agree. The information I'm going to give you now is from the family's private investigators. Okay. The day after Crystal's death, Tony attempted to claim a $65,000 State Farm life insurance policy that he believed Crystal to be a part of. See, Crystal had actually worked for State Farm several years before and was a part of their group life insurance policy. But then she stopped working, and in 2020, she helped Tony with his karate studio, which was failing by 2023. So Tony himself called State Farm, where she used to work, and asked if she could have her old job back. And they had an opening, so she went to go work for State Farm.
How nice of him.
Mm-hmm. And this was like January 2023. Remember, we're at beginning of February 2023 is when she had died. When he contacted...
So hold on. What you're saying is we have financial issues in the home.
Oh, we'll get to those. Yes, absolutely.
Well, we have to list reasons that things might have been happening other than the way that they were.
We do have significant financial issues. Yes. When Tony contacted State Farm the day after her death, he was informed that she had not been added to the group life insurance policy yet because she hadn't worked there long enough. The owner she hadn't qualified yet. So he was told no. But then he continued to bring it up several times after being told that there was no term life insurance policy. Even when he went to go pick up her personal effects, he brought it up again.
Man.
All right. He was just real convinced that she was going to, because she was a part of that group term life insurance before when she worked there. He didn't realize that that's actually a benefit that you become eligible for after you've worked, for so long, whatever, 3 months, whatever it is. She hadn't worked there long enough to be a part of it yet. She hadn't been added to it yet. He didn't know that. That's important information, I think.
I think if something was investigated, you would have found out that there were financial issues and this information regarding a life insurance policy that was non-existent.
Right. Which is why the private investigators investigated and found this. He also happened to Google, quote, "When is the appropriate time to start dating after a spouse's death?" End quote.
Did he do that before or after her death?
4 days after her death. After the sudden and unexpected loss of his spouse. 4 days after.
Some people have needs, Charnell.
That's what... Oh, it's interesting you would use those words. We'll get to his needs. I just love how the way that you're always on my wavelength.
Well, my sarcastic brain, it's an actual ancient functioning part of some people's brains. Yeah. Mine goes into overdrive.
It's working. It is. It's working great. He made several sexual advances to women who were sharing heartfelt condolences and sympathies for the loss of Crystal.
No.
To him
No.
and their 2 children.
Can you imagine going to a funeral of a friend of yours and their spouse
Nope.
making an advance at you?
No.
Or making a comment to you?
I would vomit.
I was just going to say I would vomit too.
I would have an actual physical reaction to somebody doing that.
Can you imagine just my face?
I have more specifics for us later.
No,
but
Charnell.
it gets even more disgusting. You want to talk about vomit? Like everyone should get the nearest bag to them before I get to this part because it is icky. And again, there's no suspects in this case because it hasn't been properly investigated. And I'm not saying that Tony did anything, even arranged for this or had any, whatever.
But we don't know.
But we don't know because it wasn't investigated.
But we do know some things that were investigated.
And I'm going to tell you, based on the things that the private investigators got, at the very least, we can say he's an icky man.
Motive?
Oh, we have clear motive for sure. I mean, it's as old as time.
These are the things you look at. Mm-hmm. Motive means an opportunity.
Yes. So Tony's statements do change over time from that initial interview, that 7-minute debriefing that the police are calling an interview, on what he did the morning of, okay? As more information comes to light, he initially said that he left the house in the morning about 8 a.m., drove to a nearby town to deposit a check, got some lunch, then went to a high school for a 3 o'clock karate class that he taught for the remainder of the day. Okay.
So he wasn't really doing anything up until the karate class at 3.
No. Then in the other police officer's report, he mentions that he deposited a check, got a haircut, then went to lunch, and then got his daughter from school and called the medical clinic at 3:45 to check and see if Crystal was still at her appointment since he hadn't been able to get a hold of her. And then he went to Walmart.
And he decided to have his cop friend go check on her in the meantime?
Yes.
Instead of coming home?
Yes.
I don't like it. I was originally thinking and hoping that this guy had a job and he worked like an hour away from home and that he was literally sitting in his office from, 8 a.m. to whenever he got worried about his wife.
No. Let's get into the marriage a little bit. It was not without its problems. They had serious financial issues due to his failing karate business. And to complicate things more, Tony was said to be interested in a swinger lifestyle, something that Crystal was not into, and prior to her death, she strongly suspected Tony of cheating on her. So much so that she started to track his whereabouts with a Google tracker, something that becomes very intriguing for private investigators. And the first thing that is noticed is that when Tony left his residence at 8 a.m. that morning, well, let me tell you what it shows. Because, of course, the private investigators...
I picture a map with just little dots.
That's what it is.
I know what it
Tony's
is because I have people on tethers, but I want to see Tony's dot and where it's going.
Yeah.
Like a tiny little satanic Pac-Man.
Well, here he goes. According to, now remember, we already know what he told law enforcement. 2 different stories, essentially. But he's saying...
That's a cue. That's a trigger.
It is. He's saying, I left about 8 a.m. That was the last time that I saw her. Okay, she wasn't feeling well. She made a doctor's appointment. He went into town. He deposited a check.
There should be proof of that?
There was. That happened at like 10:51.
There should be proof of the haircut.
a.m. Well, he only told one police officer that he got a haircut. He didn't mention the haircut to the sheriff in the initial interview.
Huh.
Okay, so that's a change. The haircut became just sudden information of like, oh, wait, you went and got a haircut? Why didn't you mention that the other time?
I forgot.
Then he also had said that he was in a karate class all day. Okay, no. He went and picked his daughter up from school, which is also odd because every other day except for February 9th, his daughter rode the bus to and from school. So,
from her home?
From their home.
Probably he didn't want her to go there.
Of course he didn't. Right? Why on this day is he picking her up? And then they go to Sonic.
Because his wife wasn't answering her phone.
Yeah. Well, we find out from the little Google tracker. He picks her up. Then he drives very, very slowly to Sonic. Extremely slowly. Like 35-minute drive that should have only taken 9 minutes. Now I'm way off track. I'm like looking at you in the eye telling you this story instead of reading my notes.
We are really making... because, we're processing this in our eyeballs.
Okay. And so... Then he drives to Walmart. Okay. And it's from Walmart that he says that he gets a hold of Chuck and asks Chuck. But we'll get into those specifics in a minute. But I'm just saying the stories have changed. But what we do know, he leaves his residence at 8 a.m. and his little Google tracker that he didn't know Crystal had on him actually shows that he went to the same law enforcement agency that ends up investigating this crime. He stopped in to his old workplace. The little Google thing actually had the address pinned in his phone as work from when he used to work there.
And he happened to make a stop there in the morning.
He happened to make a stop there in the morning.
Maybe to see some old friends?
Yeah. But isn't that odd that it's not mentioned in either one of the police reports? He never tells the sheriff that he left his house at 8 a.m. and then went to go visit his old buddies.
I'm
right?
all ears. I'm all ears.
So it says that he went to 315 East Main Street in Oak Grove when he had that he had pinned, right? So he also picked his daughter up, as I told you, from school. They went to Sonic. It took 35 minutes for him. Something that should have been a 9-minute drive took 35 minutes. Then it shows that at about 4 p.m., they drove very slowly to Walmart.
Right.
Okay.
This is where he calls the cop friend from.
Until 4:37. Now, private investigators discovered that he Googled the number for the clinic that Crystal was supposed to be at. He Googled that number at 4:15. Remember, the police have not checked this man's phone records. Okay, so they don't know any of this information because they're not investigating this. But he claimed that he called the clinic at 3:15. He told 3:45. He told police officers that he called the clinic at 3:45 and discovered
she hadn't come
home. When in fact he actually Googled the number for the clinic at 4:15, and then he immediately at 4:15 also called Chuck. Chuck wasn't home at the time, like he couldn't go right over.
Was there any evidence that he actually called the clinic where she went or just Googled the number?
Well, we don't know because we don't have his phone records. Yeah, because this hasn't been investigated properly. So the family is currently working on getting Crystal's case reopened and hoping to have an actual investigation done to give her family closure as to what happened that day. Despite leisurely driving around, I should say that I'm going to read from some different legal paperwork that has been submitted to try to help get this case properly investigated, okay? Despite leisurely driving around town all day and afternoon without bothering to check on his wife, according to evidence, at 4:23 p.m., Mr. Jones made a phone call to both Crystal and to Officer Chuck Harris. The following discrepancies between what Tony Jones states and what other evidence shows necessitates why his phone records need to be looked at. Officer Chuck Harris said that Mr. Jones called him on his cell phone to do a wellness check on Crystal at about 4:23 p.m. Officer Harris states that he called Mr. Jones back when he could not get an answer at the door, but he doesn't specify a time for the second call. However, his arrival time that he said, Chuck Harris said in his report, he is an active deputy, so he did have to write his report, right? He says that his arrival time was 4:33. At 4:35, Officer Alan Irby said that they received a report of a death by firearm. If Mr. Jones is stating that he and Officer Harris remained on the phone with each other, as Tony Jones claims, it didn't seem possible that the police department could receive the report that they had a death by a firearm at 4:35. Okay, and remember, the coroner's report says that her body was discovered at 5:05. I mean, initially it said 10:35 and then was scratched out and said 5:05.
I don't think we have any valid time for the coroner's report.
We do not. No. At 4:37 p.m., Tony Jones leaves this address in Oak Grove, and at 4:30, it's actually did not show an address on the pings. Okay, that's why it's an unknown address. At 4:39 p.m., the coroner report states that the coroner was notified by the police department of a deceased body found by Chuck Harris. The coroner's investigation report states upon his arrival, and we don't know when that is, the coroner was met by a David Voigt. He mentions no other officers in his report, only David Voigt. But wait, Officer Chuck Harris is supposed to have been there. Why is he not mentioned if he is really there? At 4:41 p.m., Officer Chuck Harris states that he called Tony Jones back to say that Crystal was deceased. However, Officer Harris stated that he asked Mr. Jones where he was at, in which he replied he was at the karate school.
But he wasn't.
He wasn't. He was not. He was.
These are all tiny little lies.
Yes, they add up. Google location
people
records.
can be mistaken about their recollection, but if you get these records and phone records and Google records and you investigate something, then you can sit down with them and say, let's go through this though now with an actual timeline. Right. And then it causes me concern that he allegedly called her around 11 or so in the morning. He says it's the last time he talked to her.
10:06.
But do we know that they actually talked?
No.
Because they didn't.
He says 15 to 20 minutes, but we don't have his phone records. We have no idea.
Okay. And I didn't know. And they wouldn't have checked hers or anything because they didn't take anything.
Nobody investigated. Right. And we don't have her phone. He has it.
But what causes me concern is that we do have an autopsy that's indicating an approximate time of death for her.
Yeah.
And we don't have any little pitter-patter Pac-Man marks taking him back home around that time.
Yes, there is a ping of him being near the home at 10:30 a.m.
There is, after he left at 8. Mm-hmm. Okay, that part I might have missed.
Not right at the... I hadn't said it yet.
Well, okay.
I hadn't said it yet.
My brain went to the pings.
Yes.
And again, that's not to say he can be completely innocent. He hasn't been charged with anything.
Right.
We have covered once before a situation like this where there was a murder for hire. There's a lot of options, none of which we know because, well, we don't really have an investigation yet.
For sure. And what the problem here is that Tony told the officers that Chuck stayed on the phone with him this whole time. Chuck's statements are different. Chuck is like, no, I called him back. He called for a welfare check. I went and called him and told him I can't get into that. No one's answering at the door. He gave me permission to come in.
I hung up.
And he told me where the bedroom was.
And I went in.
Right. And then I called him back to tell him that his wife was deceased. Okay. Those are very different statements, guys. Like, were you on the phone with him when he found the body or not?
Because when you first were explaining how he explained it to law enforcement, I was thinking this guy's literally got him on the phone and is hearing even the reaction, oh my God, man, like she's dead. And like you get his responses, but none of that actually happened.
None of that happened. No. And not all the right deputies that are on scene were even documented correctly because Chuck Harris isn't mentioned anywhere in anyone's reports, okay? But
they know he was there?
Yeah. He's the one that found her. Chuck Harris was absolutely there.
He didn't take off and leave. He clearly was there and waited for law enforcement.
Right. Yep. So, I mean, and that's another way. The coroner's investigation report states that when he was there, which he never, that's the other problem. The coroner does not state when he arrived, his arrival time.
Charnell, all of this is because they never investigated this like a suspicious death or even like a gunshot death of any kind. They investigated it from the beginning as a suicide. They're not going to make a complete full police report like you would in a crime. They're probably entering like officer's notes or like a small report. And they're not listing all of the people that were there. They're not listing all of the evidence that they saw because they didn't take the time to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I agree. And even if you look at this completely innocently without taking into consideration the fact that he had a relationship with this department and clearly had a relationship with the one, was it the chief? You definitely are coming into this with what we call investigation bias.
Sure.
And there does not appear to have been any attempt to look at any of the alternative hypotheses in this case.
Right.
And those are situations where small town PDs can actually learn from them and do something different. So this is a learning opportunity. Open it back up. Send it to somebody, a different agency, to look at what you did and how you investigated it, not just PIs, but send it to the state police, send it to whoever, and have them see with a fresh pair of eyes. Like, what does it hurt?
Right. Right.
Because this case, to them, the family wants it reinvestigated. This is closed as a suicide. And there's no death report or new coroner's report as a correction that's been made, because you have a coroner here who's indicating this was suicide and is possibly mistaken regarding what lividity is.
Right. Well, didn't even know how to spell the deceased name, her date of birth, or her date of death.
And she's cremated, so you can't do an exhumation, but usually with an autopsy, you have photographs and such.
Yeah.
Where's an independent coroner?
Right.
You know,
right.
can you get the information, family, and maybe they have, and maybe they'll let us know after this, and send it to an independent medical examiner.
Sure.
To take a peek at what was done there and looked at there.
I do believe that the private investigators have had their experts look at this and say,
and I'm sure,
you know,
I'm
this
sure
is
they know just as much, if not more, than me when it comes to that.
Yes, but they I think have said this is bruising indicative of
assault.
Yes,
okay. That's how they came up with
mm-hmm.
their theories, not just from their own perspective.
For sure,
because you wouldn't just want a cop or a me looking at that and going, "Oh yeah, no, that's not lividity." You would want an expert to make the determination.
This unknown address that he's at this time when he's finding out that his wife is deceased. Okay, it took him 14 minutes to drive from that address to his home, which is the exact time that it should take if you're doing the speed limit. So he was not in any sort of rush of urgency after finding out that his wife died. He went the speed limit.
I'm never going to advocate for somebody to avoid traffic laws.
Sure. Just a little different. Officer Harris stated that Mr. Jones said that he was at the karate school. However, the Google location records show that Tony Jones had actually left an undetermined address in Oak Grove 4 minutes before this time, before he got the phone call, according to his Google timeline location records, and was traveling when this phone call was made. The timeline given by Tony Jones of his drive to the residence is at odds with the Google location records and what we know about how long it takes to get around town. At 4:51 p.m., Mr. Jones arrived at the residence that he shared with Crystal. It took him 14 minutes to get from the last verified address on Constitution Ave to his residence after being told that his wife had passed away. That is the exact time that it should have, as I said, taken for him to do the speed limit. When he gets there, Mr. Jones can be heard in a recorded statement. The officer says he opened the door and he said, Crystal, and then he at that point he said, Tony, I'm sorry to tell you that she is deceased. And so then I rushed home. This is what he was saying. The question in the recorded police statement, where were you at that time? I was at a bowling alley by our karate school. I was at a bowling alley.
What? Where the fuck does that come from?
No idea.
Where was his daughter? Did he take his daughter bowling?
He took his daughter to Sonic after school.
What did he do with her?
But where did the bowling alley come up?
I want to know where both the kids are. There's supposedly two, right?
Yes, he has a daughter and she does. Yeah, as well.
I see.
Yeah. So at 5:56 p.m., Mr. Jones left the scene at his residence and drove 12.2 miles, which took him 42 minutes. At 6:38...
Are they in Atlanta?
No, they're in small town Louisiana. At 6:38 p.m., Mr. Jones arrived at 305 East Main Street in Oak Grove, Louisiana, which is the address of the West Carroll Sheriff's Department, to be interviewed. It took Mr. Jones nearly 4 times the amount of time to drive the normal drive time between the two addresses. Phone records of Mr. Jones are vital to prove who he spoke to and why he was allowed to take 42 minutes to drive from his home to the recorded interview after Crystal's death with the police department. The police know the 12 miles does not take 42 minutes.
Yeah, he was on the phone.
Yeah.
I'm assuming it was with an attorney.
Perhaps.
And that's protected possibly by attorney-client privilege, but we won't know.
We don't know unless we get the phone records to see.
He clearly didn't have to invoke his right to an attorney during that conversation.
Right.
I'm not going to call it an interview.
It was not. Nope. Remember I mentioned the sexual advances on women shortly after?
You sure did.
Well, get your vomit bags, everybody. Here is an example of just 5 days after Crystal's death when a female friend put together some food items and went to the house to deliver them alone to Tony.
No.
She was later interviewed by a private investigator. She says, on February 14th, 2023, she went to deliver the items. Tony was home by himself, and there was no immediate or extended family at the home visiting him, which this particular person found odd. They spent about an hour at the house and then decided to leave because she felt uncomfortable that she was there alone with Tony. On her drive back, she began to receive text messages. I'm purposely leaving her name out. It's redacted in a lot of things anyway.
I don't think that she has done anything wrong.
Yeah. She started to receive text messages from Tony that included some very suggestive and sexually explicit language. He texted her that his dick was hard and that he's still a man and has needs, just as you said earlier.
Well, I know things about men.
Then Tony asked if Crystal ever spoke to her about their sex life. And she was very shocked. And she's like, first of all, no, she did not talk about your sex life. And I'm horrified that so soon after your wife's death, you're going to come on to me like this. And furthermore, this particular woman is engaged. And he knows that.
My dick is still hard.
Yep. My dick is hard. I'm still a man with needs. So we have a situation. We have a marriage that had financial issues. His business that he had this big dream for was not doing well. She had, she went back to work at State Farm, something that he had arranged for her because he had known about her life insurance prior too, right? Like, this is just all a little too coincidental for me.
I mean, just worth an investigation from what I'm hearing.
Exactly. Like, let's just get all the information.
Well, somebody
that we didn't get the first time around.
A private investigation firm has done this.
Yes, and then look at all of it and decide, hey, is there an alternative hypothesis here aside from a self-inflicted death, right?
There's always an alternative hypothesis.
Is there means, motive, and opportunity?
Is there enough information at this point in time to validate reopening an investigation? To start an investigation.
Mm-hmm. To start, not reopen, start.
Right.
It's one thing if it had ever been investigated.
And I think that in order to do that, you need to get some different scientific expert opinions about what the evidence shows with her. Mm-hmm. Some forensics.
Which they're already at odds because there was not a ton of photographs taken during the autopsy.
Well, and you're not, if there was not DNA samples taken at the time either, under her nails, those type of things, then that's information you can never get because you never get a second opinion on something that was never completed. Yep,
and her body was cremated immediately.
I mean, do we know if there were photographs taken at the crime scene? I'm sure there were.
There were, and you can see some of them. Actually, I'm going to tell you about their page. It's all linked in the show notes.
Well, I'm just talking about the gun and how it was held. Is it possible for her to have shot herself in the head at that point in time? Where trajectory-wise could the shell casing have gone? We don't know if there was any gunpowder residue found on her hands because she wasn't swabbed for it. So these are all concerns.
So the concern of the family especially is like the gun casing absolutely couldn't have been on her nightstand based on where she was found. Also, her finger was still up against the trigger, Megan. That's it was positioned. You can see photos of it on there. They do have a Justice for Crystal McCrory Facebook and justiceforcrystalmccrory.com. There's a petition. It's all in the show notes, you guys, and I definitely encourage you to check it out. But and there are photographs. Like, you can see the photo that they took. Her finger is resting on the trigger.
I don't love it.
Her thumb is still slightly around the butt. Like, that's not what happens. I don't know if you guys realize this, but your entire body goes limp.
Yeah.
When you're no longer alive.
And depending on how you were laying or sitting or standing. And these are all things that you have to take into consideration during an investigation.
Yes. And she was laying. This is what's peculiar to me, too. She was in her makeup and her clothes, but she was found in bed with the pillow over her face, blankets on her body, covered up.
That's not how you kill yourself.
No.
Not in perfectly like that and then bring the guy. I don't know. I don't like any of that. Does this remind you of Molly's case?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Yeah, it reminds me of Molly's.
It's just when she reached out to us on Instagram, I was like, I'm absolutely going to cover your sister's case.
I'm
If for
so
nothing
sorry.
more than to
Say her name.
Yes, for people to just remember who the heck she was, and that, oh my gosh, and she has the brightest smile ever. And, you know, the family's like, she was the best aunt, sister, mother, daughter that anyone could ask for. She has the most engaging smile. And I don't know, it just, this entire thing does not sit well at all. And like you said, at the very least, the family just wants an investigation. They never even got an investigation. Usually we come here with a call to action for a reopening or something, right?
Yeah.
Or to bring information for a cold case. That's not even what we're doing here today. It's simply, there was no investigation. It was immediately ruled a suicide and called that from the beginning.
Well, you need the criminal justice process to work.
Yeah.
You need an investigation so that it can be sent to their DA or prosecutor's office, whatever they call it, after an appropriate investigation by law enforcement. And then the chief law enforcement officer of your county, as long as, and in Louisiana is French law, but in our state, that's, you know, in your county, your prosecutor.
Yeah.
They can make a determination about whether there's probable cause to charge in that case.
Right.
And you might not get the answer you want.
Sure.
You might not get a charge, but at least it was done.
Yeah.
At least the investigation done. It was submitted so that neutral party, that prosecutor, that DA, that attorney general, depending on who's hearing it, can look at it and say, I'm sorry, but there's not enough for me to charge. And then you cross that bridge when you come to it.
Right.
Like other families we were dealing with. Let's talk about Morgan's case, right?
Exactly.
You know, we see it, but it has to work. And this family, a little bit different than the other families that we dealt with on this, they didn't even get the investigation to start the process.
No. I mean, and I can see why Jana, when she is hearing these professionals say, well, you know, we still have to do an autopsy on this. Just because you walked in and thought it was a suicide, that's exactly why he is saying that. Just because it looks like a suicide, we still have to do an autopsy. Yeah, you're right. And it needs to be done thoroughly.
And it's just really too bad that during an active investigation, if one was being done at this time and they were to take some of these, if they were to truly done an investigation in terms of questioning whereabouts and timelines and phones and things like that, that you would do if for any other reason than to rule them out, right?
Yes.
You always want to rule out the spouse.
That's exactly it. Yes. And when you've got financial issues, you have different, he wants a swinger lifestyle. He's into a swinger lifestyle.
But no one knew any of that stuff. No one knew any of that
stuff. The family did.
Yeah.
So
but it wasn't investigated.
And correct. And even the family's like, yeah, when we got, you know, when he was calling us to tell us that she was gone, the brother was like, yeah, when I saw his name pop up, I figured he was calling to tell me that Crystal left him.
Right.
I mean, the family was not, they weren't shocked by, you know, they knew there were issues is what I'm trying to say.
And my point with all of that is that you could have stopped a cremation from happening.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because there would have been an active investigation, possibly with a suspect that needs to be ruled out. I'm not saying he did it. We don't know.
We don't.
But he's a suspect that needed to have been ruled out. A POI.
Right.
A person of interest.
Person of interest.
And the person of interest, like I've covered in the Kelly Clayton murder for hire case, where you're dealing with insurance and things like that as well, you have to halt what you're doing with the body here so that you can preserve some evidence and get what is necessary. Yeah. It was very rushed. Very rushed.
It was. And my heart breaks for them.
And perhaps from the coroner's or ME's perspective, they don't feel like they rushed because for them it was a no-brainer suicide, just putting some shit on paper to close it out. And I don't know that there was necessarily malice or a cover-up by them at all. I would not insinuate that. But they clearly didn't do the same job that they would have done had it been put down as a suspicious death or just a death by gunshot instead of, hey, this is a suicide.
I agree. Yes, I 100% agree.
Policies need to change.
Right down to those minute details that were completely overlooked. The spelling of her name, her date of birth and the date of death.
Oh, my God.
The time the body was found.
Oh, my God.
I mean,
I'd throw a huge, I'd throw a huge fucking fit.
It clearly shows you were rushing through. You were not taking your time. You weren't seeing my loved one. You were doing a job that day as quickly as possible. I feel my heart breaks for them. I hope that somehow our coverage could maybe help just bring awareness. There is a petition, like I said, in these show notes that people can sign to try to help get this investigated properly. And yeah, I look forward someday to hopefully having an update on at least getting the family a proper investigation.
She's going to be listed now, or placed on my list of those cases that we need closure on.
Yes.
And we have a few that are very near and dear to us.
Yep.
Not the big name ones, you guys. We're talking about you guys, victims and family members of victims who have called and wanted their loved one's name to have been said out loud a few more times. You guys are the ones that are on my list.
Right.
Our list.
Exactly. And the fact. So thank you, Jana, for reaching out directly to us and asking for us to cover your sister's case. And we're so sorry for your loss. And may sweet Crystal rest in peace. And I will switch gears now
Are you gonna bathe me?
Our brain bath segment. And I sent this to you in brain bath, Jason, and to our Louisianian. That's
Miss
not what they call each other. Miss Tasha.
Louisianian? I think it's fine. Sure,
it is now. But I'm going to share it. It felt right.
Cajuns.
It felt right to share it with this case, since this was a Louisiana case, right? And our Tosh works. She actually runs 2 crumble cookies.
She does?
In Louisiana.
Is this a crumble cookie story?
It is a crumble cookie review. Yeah.
Oh my God.
And so it's hilarious. And anyone who has had crumble cookie can relate to all of this.
Can I tell you something really quick about Tosh?
Yeah.
When she and Natalie and I got together and we were hanging out at our hotel, of course, different hotels, because I messed that one all up. Our general audience may not know that. But we're sitting in the hotel lobby, had a snack and a drink, and we're like, kind of wanted dessert. We called a crumble cookie and had them deliver a huge assortment of crumble cookies.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
Tasha got a hold of them and had them delivered. So we're eating all of these crumble cookies. We were literally sharing them with the wait staff and the bartenders.
Oh, how sweet.
Yeah.
Well, they're gigantic.
They are ginormous. We're cutting little like pizza size slices out of them. So I want to hear a crumble cookie review.
Here's a crumble cookie reviewed from Travis Reed, who's just adorable. He posted a picture of himself on his review. Look how cute he is.
Oh, hi, Travis.
Aww.
Travis is more than a little cute, by the way.
Yes.
Okay.
It says, so I got talked into taking a trip to a place called Crumble Cookies. Bruh. I thought I was in the triple stacked line at Chick-fil-A. I got out of the car, and this darn line was longer than a Monday. Cookie crumble done messed around and changed my life for the better. I'm waving at neighbors in the neighborhood for no reason. I used a bath bomb. I was washing my car and a neighbor asked that lame line, "Are you going to do mine next?" And I said, "Yes, sirree, bring it on over, pal." I watched a Disney movie. A Disney movie. We don't talk about Bruno. No. I hugged an enemy. And I had supper. Them cookies tasted like the summer of '69. Love and happiness, dancing in the moonlight, Cinderella's castle, and any Bruno Mars song. Oh, and a pixie stick.
I love it.
I took one bite, and that mug had my stomach melting like the Wicked Witch of the West. I swear to God.
God, like G-A-W-D.
Yes,
God.
And it actually says, I sweater God.
I swear to
I
God.
love it. I sweater God. Them sweets and cookies taste like, and it gives the delicious emoji over and over again. This mug tastes like a Girl Scout cookie on steroids that went to Planet Fitness with its gallon of water jug and set off the lunk alarm. I'm talking testosterone up. Juicy. I peeped the calorie count of these cookies, and I'm going to be at a million before this week over.
Yeah.
But this sugar drive got me on 12. So I'm going to go on and somersault this 6-mile trail right quick.
Oh my God.
Talk about them type 12 diabetes.
Just 12 diabetes.
Just take the whole foot. And they just be dropping new flavors every week, like mixtapes.
Yes.
Oh my Lord, I ain't gonna make it. I'm sweating dough and sprinkles just thinking about it. Let's get ready to crumble.
Let's get ready to crumble.
Yes, 40 out of 10. That's what he gave them.
They need
I
to.
love
I
him.
hope Crumble Cookie finds that and like post that.
Yes.
That is epic. I love it.
Yeah,
And he's not wrong.
Perfect. He's not wrong. They are delicious.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I
type
get a
12
mediocre one, but
diabetes.
sometimes yeah, I'm like, oh my God, this is cakey, doughy, calorie deliciousness. Just take my foot now. Diabetes.
Yeah, it is.
Right,
That's
it
what
is.
I just love. He's like,
what it is.
it's a type 12 diabetes. Just take
the
my
whole
foot now.
Take the whole 12 inches. Wait. The foot.
The foot.
Sorry, Travis.
Oh, well, you know what Salt and Pepper says. 12
Yes.
inches to a yard.
Yes, that is what they say.
That's what they say.
And now let's shoop on out of here also.
That's right. We hope that you keep it curious.
And keep listening.
Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.